Hola a todos, buenas tardes, boa tarde. Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Lili Vieira de Carvalho. I am the Executive Director of LAC, the Vancouver Latin American Cultural Center, and I will be your host for today's event. My colleague Angela is also working on this event and she'll be making sure that everything runs smoothly. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that we are hosting this event from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And I want to encourage all of you to read and understand the history of this land and the people who have taken care of it for thousands of years and what it means for you to be here. Angela will share in the chat a resource that can be really useful in incorporating acts of reconciliation in our daily lives. Especially, I would like to mention again the horrible news that we have today of another 750 graves that were found in a residential school. So incorporating these acts of reconciliation, it's one of the things that we can do to try to work for the future of Canada, a future more inclusive. VLAC is a nonprofit organization with the mandate of sharing a deeper understanding of Latin American arts and cultures. Our goal is to establish the first cultural center for Latin American arts in Canada, right here in Vancouver. If you still don't know about our organization, or if you'd like to know a little bit more, please visit our website. Angela is dropping the website on the chat. By registering, your email was added to our newsletter list, and you received news about our programming once a month. Of course, you can always unsubscribe, but it's a great way of keeping in touch with things that we program and that we have been doing. Today's format will be quite simple. Patrick and Celine will have a 40 to 50 minute conversation discussing the complexities of the Afro-Latin identity. Its many facets, challenges, and the importance of recognizing the African influence in the Latin culture. And then at the end, we'll open up the floor to questions from the audience. So as you listen to this event, if you have a great question that you would like to share, please use the Q&A button to add it there, or you can also share it in the chat. I actually don't think that we have a Q&A button for this. That is for the webinar format. So just feel free to put the question in the chat. If you are watching from Facebook, we are sharing this event to Facebook. Your questions there will be related to the speakers as well. When Patrick and Celine finish with the presentation, feel free to unmute your microphones, raise your hand. When you have a question, it will be an informal conversation. This event is being recorded for our archives and will be shared on VLAC's YouTube channel. We are also live streaming to our Facebook page, so feel free to keep your camera off if you are camera shy. And there will be a good chance to rewatching or sharing those links later on. We are going to share the link to our YouTube at the end of the program. I also want to acknowledge the support of Canadian Heritage and BC Arts Council for this series of events, because we partner with the Vancouver Public Library for a 5-part series called Racism, Latin American and Identity. And this program is kind of a bonus program following up on that conversation. If you missed the events of Racisms, where we discussed Latin American identity from several points of view, you can look back at those videos on YouTube, and Angela is putting that link on the chat as well. So I'm thrilled to be here today, because this event is this continuation of this discussion that we started last month on racisms. So I'm excited to introduce Patrick and Celine. Patrick Cajina Cortez was born in Calgary, Alberta, to Nicaraguan parents in a very Nicaraguan household. Patrick always felt a pull to his Latin roots. Through founding La Connexional, a social enterprise, he was able to take the time to analyze his own background and navigate the elements of the African and Latin American identities. Given the newfound focus on African and Latin culture in our mainstream culture, he hopes that through his work, more people will question themselves and challenge biases that we grow up with to foster a more understanding world. And now a little shout out, Celine is actually wearing a hoodie that is from that social enterprise, from La Connexional. Celine Caruso Dixon is a fourth-year political sciences student at the University of Alberta. Her passion for social justice movements and politics has brought her to be part of multiple organizations and committees on and off campus, most notably becoming the president of the University of Alberta's Black Students Association for the 2020-2021 school year, and her personal creation, Zion, an open mic series that focuses on minority youth presenting their talent in poetry, music, and performance art. Welcome, Patrick and Celine. So over to Patrick. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that great introduction. So yeah, my name is Patrick, and you know, Cajina Cortez. So that's where the Latino really comes through. And I think my personal goal with this conversation is really, one, to provide a perspective on Afro-Latinidad, because it really is a new concept, a new kind of way of socially organizing people in Latin America that kind of goes to challenge Latinidad itself and what that really means. And hopefully we, both Celine and myself, coming from two very distinct backgrounds, two very distinct understandings of what Latinidad, what Afro-Latinidad, what Africanness, Blackness is, that we can hopefully provoke questions coming from all of you that are listening, and really to have a fruitful conversation to better understand our culture and our place in North American society.
Yeah, just as Patrick said, we're really excited to be here, and we're really excited to talk about this, and very, very diverse conversations for sure that will be happening. So I really hope that you enjoy it. Yeah.
So I think what I would like to start off with, Celine, is if you could give some insight into your background and where you find yourself you fit within Afro-Latinidad or Blackness or Caribbean, or like how do you identify?
Yeah, so Afro-Latinidad, really, like when I first heard the word, I was like, oh my gosh, that's me. Like it was just the embodiment of who I was. I come from two immigrant parents. I was born here in Edmonton. My mom is Portuguese and Italian. My dad is Jamaican and Cuban. And so there was already in and of itself Afro-Latinness, but the word wasn't really there. So it was kind of just like a mismatch of like, well, I'm Latin, but I'm also Caribbean, but like there's a lot of connectedness between these two cultures, and understanding where my place was within that. Also, because of who my parents were, having so many diverse languages being spoken in the house, like you learn them all, but you learn none of them all at the same time. So you understood everything, but you couldn't actually speak it. And so it was also like a very interesting conglomeration of languages and cultures and food and everything like that, that I had the opportunity to grow up with and be a part of in the communities that I was dancing in and volunteering in and stuff like that. I think that my experience in actually becoming part of Afro-Latin culture and actually understanding my place within it came later on, after high school, after I started actually getting together with other people who were Afro-Latinos or who were Afro-Latinas. Just the community of a bunch of mixed kids who were both Black and Latin based, who didn't really understand either place all that much because they were mismatched into both of them. And most of us couldn't speak Spanish, and most of us couldn't speak any other languages other than English or French. And having that mini community to like rely on and saying like, we are Afro-Latin peoples. This is one part of us. This is how we kind of exemplify ourselves. And this is what we think Afro-Latinness is, and then seeing a massive community of Latin people and Black people understand that and be like, oh, yeah, you guys are all valid in here. And there's been a long history of Afro-Latinness without ever having the term Afro-Latin peoples. Understanding that and having that kind of explode during my university years was something really cool for me, and something that I really got to explore and understand of like, what does it mean to actually be Latina in the sense that I am Portuguese and Italian and Cuban? And then what does it mean to also be Black in the sense that I'm Caribbean Black, because there are a lot of different variations of being Black. And how does Latin culture influence the Caribbean culture? How does Caribbean culture influence Latin culture? Really diving deep into the history of how those two cultures interplay, and how that affects the rest of the world was something that I really got to experience, and something that also affects my research to this day. So it's very long and interesting and complex.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just so that everybody's clear from where I come from, so like Lily mentioned, I was born also in Canada, in Calgary. And that's part of the reason why my name is Patrick as opposed to Patricio or Javier or whatever, because my parents were also fully aware of the society that I was going to be growing up into. So they wanted me to avoid as much racism as I could, at least when people saw my first name. I mean, they would guess right away when it comes to Cajina Cortez. There's no way around that. But within Latin culture, and the reason why I say I grew up in a very Nicaraguan household is because we still had many of those ideals and values that were inculcated to us as we were growing up, even within a Canadian context. And part of those things, and even though I appreciate, being of Latin descent, the issue, and I think this was explored during the previous racism's events that Black has put on, is that Latinidad is seen as a very specific type of person or group of people, right? Latinidad doesn't necessarily take into account indigenous, Afro-Indigenous peoples throughout Latin America. It doesn't really take into account Black people in Latin America, even to the extent that even Mexico wasn't even counting Black people in their census up until I think 2010. And for me, in a more localized way, Latinidad for me meant not really seeing the Blackness that was present in my family. And I think emblematic of what a lot of Latinos tend to hear is, we tend to hear that Dominicanos, everybody knows it's a very Black island. Haiti, the Dominican Republic, they're cousins, they're brothers and sisters. But people know also that being Black, the further away you are from whiteness, kind of the harder society treats you, or the worse society treats you. And I think that's a large part of the reason why you have many Dominican people being like, oh, I'm not Black, I'm Dominicano, or no, I'm Moreno. Even though they look exactly like as someone who would be Black. Yeah, and so for me, it was the importance of really understanding where my family's roots were and where my roots were, because I have uncles, my grandparents that look phenotypically Black, but even themselves, they wouldn't admit to being Black. And so even up till recently, it's still not something that is really talked about in Latin America, I find, of people who can kind of straddle that area of Latinidad, Blackness. And so I think what's really important for me, and what I've kind of discovered throughout the years and through La Connexional, which the focus is really bringing together the African and Black communities and fostering more understanding between the two, because there's so much of the richness of Latin culture that comes from indigenous roots, that comes from African roots, and that Latinos themselves don't recognize. And a large part of that is because of this anti-Blackness that kind of enrobes Latinidad, and especially that put to speak Spanish well, right? Like and I'm sure maybe you've grown up possibly even being bullied for the fact that you don't speak Spanish, but you still consider yourself a Latina, right? Yeah. And so I think, and even for me growing up, it's a struggle. So, because you have the Latinos that come, newly to Canada that speak their Spanish from their countries, and you're like, oh, we're both Latinos, we can connect. But without the Spanish, it's kind of like, oh, so I'm not really Latino. I'm not really. How did you navigate that? Like,
yeah, that was a big thing for me, actually. And honestly, it wasn't until I found that community of other Afro-Latin people who didn't speak Spanish, or who didn't speak it well, that I was like, oh, there are other people like me. I'm not the only one out there. I think that, and honestly, it really comes down to the fact that, our languages really do make up who we are, and they become a big part of our cultures as Latin people, and it's an important thing, and it's important to have your language present, and I truly believe that. And when I think the funniest thing for me was when people would hear that, like, I didn't speak Spanish very well, or that I didn't speak it at all, especially certain dialects. They'd be like, "Oh, so are you really Latina?" And it was like, well, yes, I am. And you kind of have to like defend yourself and being like, am I really Latin enough, or am I really Black enough? Because that was also a really big thing where it was like, oh, but you're also like really Latin based though. So like, are you really all that Black? Do you really fit into this area? And it was like, well, yeah, like, I mean, look at me kind of, but like also look at all the other Latin people who are Black. And they were like, no, but they're not Black, they're Latinos. And it's like, why does that have to be two separate categories? Why? Because there are a lot of people who straddle that line, like you said. There was a lot of bullying, definitely, and it took me a really long time to actually like accept who I was. And I think that within the Latin community, especially, and within the Black community, but you kind of see that because of the colonization that happened, because of the amount of racism that we face day to day, that have kind of enveloped the way that we operate, and how we're continuously trying to strive to be better, and continuously trying to prove who we are as Latin people, as Black people, from these colonized perspectives. Anybody who kind of challenges those notions of Latinness or Blackness are automatically put as an outsider or an enemy, even if they're in the same community as you. And that's something that I really had a hard time struggling with, and had a really hard time comprehending at first, was like, we're in the same community, and we're basically have the same culture in a sense, but I'm nowhere, like, I am an outsider compared to you. No one in the community wants to talk to me. You don't think that I am part of your communities in any way like that, but I am, and my mom's here to prove it, and my dad's here to prove it. And even my mom, when she would speak Spanish, or when she would speak Italian or Portuguese or even French, because my mom's a polyglot, she speaks a lot of languages. They would kind of like not, because my mom looks white, she looks Italian. She kind of, they gave her a weird look where it was like, how did this happen? What happened here? What was
you adopted?
Process? Yeah, a lot of are you adopted? There was a lot of are you adopted? And even with my dad, because my dad is, he's from Jamaica. His parents are, one of them's Jamaican, one of them's Cuban. Even when he was around, and he would speak and he would talk, and he really found that because of how deep his color was, and how deep of the connection he had to Jamaica, that he found himself in the Jamaican community here in Edmonton and in Calgary, and he didn't really talk too much about the Cuban side of him, and he kind of like distanced himself. And it wasn't until I was like in my teens that I even found out that I was Cuban, and I was like, you've withheld like a massive part of who I am in my identity, and who you are in your identity. And actually like interacting with my family who was Cuban at the like in Jamaica, it was massive, because they had disconnected their entire selves from the Cuban population in Cuba, and they were like, no, we don't talk to anyone over there. No, we don't do that anymore. And I was like, okay. It was a really like, and all of a sudden, like, bullying took on like a really,
and that's crazy.
yeah, right. It's insane, because that's a part of your identity, and I don't think we should be ashamed of that. I don't think that that's a bad thing. Like, I love it. I love the culture that comes from it, and I love being able to say that, yeah, you know, I am Cubana, and yeah, I am Italian, and yes, I am Portuguese and Jamaican, and there's a lot of things that I am, and I know that. But like, what do you get from coming from two mixed people already?
Yeah.
Like, you get this influx of culture, and like, you really see that there is this dichotomy of what culture means. And I think that it also boils down to the fact that from colonization to now, like, we haven't been able to structurally define what it is, like what Latinidad is and what Afro-Latinidad is. And we haven't been able to actually look at racism in those contexts and racism from our own communities, because no one wants to be, if we're going to be honest, no one wants to be called racist in our own community. We're like, no, we can't be racist. That's like something for the white people. We can't do that. And so like racism in our communities, we don't really consider it. We don't really look at it. And it's something that we need to dissect and open up, because anti-Blackness in the Latin community is heavy, but anti-Latinness in the Black community is also really heavy.
Yeah, and I think part of it comes from that political context, right? You see many of the leaders within Latin American countries are usually very light-skinned or white Latinos and Latinas. And so you see that this particular skin color has power within society. You also have this idea that there's this concept of a racial democracy within Latin America. And so it's not racism because we accept everyone. Latinos can be of many different colors, but the ideal Latino is a light brown, morena, the ones they talk about in all the songs. And even in the music, you listen salsa, bachata, merengue, kizomba, reggaeton, all of them have roots in African beats. And you listen to kind of the old, like ancient African songs, and they have the conga, they have the tumbao, they have all those rhythms built in already. And you see that in Latin America, you have the European influence of a singer with lyrics, and you have some Aboriginal influence in terms of the rhythm, and then you have the African influence, the instruments and the music itself. And there's this tendency to forget about that because of the way that the society was structured. And even within Latin America, there's a lot of erasure of Blackness. And, you know, I mentioned, you know, the fact that Mexico didn't even count Black people, but then there's also, you know, Argentina, for example, that essentially eradicated its Black population, and then kind of hid it away using the different levers of power of media, and kind of helping people assume that, you know, Black people, they just never came to Argentina. And tango is this European Anglo-Saxon invention, when in reality it has its roots in the Congo. And I think, and for me, what concretely for me is kind of the opposite, because phenotypically I don't look Black, and I wouldn't say that I'm Black, because knowing the connotation that would bring, and the idea that people have of what a Black person should look like. And so for me, it's a lot easier to adopt that label of Afro-Latino because it pays respects to my African ancestry, and it pays respects to the fact that I still have living relatives that look African or look Black. And before, it just, like, it didn't occur to me that the reason why my uncle looks like a Black man is because he is Black, not because like, it's something that, like, literally before I never thought about. And the fact that, you know, all the photos of my mom and her brothers and sisters, and the fact that they all had afros, and that my grandma looks like an old Black woman, was because they are Black and because there is African ancestry in my family. But then in my mind, I was so deeply ingrained in the idea of Latinidad, and Latinidad excludes Blackness, it excludes indigenous roots. And so for me, Latinidad was just kind of this magical mix of European, African, indigenous descent, but we only focused on the fact that we're like lightly brown peoples, and without really acknowledging the different contributions of the African descendancy or the indigenous descendancy, and also the pain that was caused by colonialism and that continues to be caused by the structures that were put in place. And so I guess my question leading up to this is, coming from, I guess, the other side of the more like Black side for Afro-Latinidad, and with your experiences within the Black Students Association and Zion, like where do you see kind of Afro-Latinidad going? Like, do you find that it's going to morph into something else, or is it? I know it's a big question, but
It's a huge question. I don't know, and like the honest answer is that I don't know. I think it has a long way to go, because even in my position as the previous president, because I was just voted out, previous president for the Black Students Association, even within Zion, where I was really intertwined with Black and Latin and Indigenous peoples within Edmonton and surrounding areas, there wasn't a lot of talk of Afro-Latinidad, right? And I think La Connexional, we brought together a true meeting of Latinidad in Edmonton and in Alberta as a whole, where you saw a lot of people being like, oh, I fit into that. Like, I have been trying to figure out who I am, and like, that's where I fit into. And I think that with my position and of like influence within the community, specifically within the Black community, I don't know if in my lifetime I will see Afro-Latinidad be accepted as fully as I would like it to be within the Black community. There is a lot of talk about it. There is a lot of conversations being had about what it actually means, and how does that play into previous conceived notions and stereotypes within the Black community already. And of course, it kind of all goes back to that colonizational mindset and how that's affected our communities previously. But I really don't know where it's gonna end up. My only hope is that it, kind of skyrockets and people recognize who we are and what we are, and how our culture and in our Afro-Latinidadness, it's, there is beauty there, and there is a presence there that you can't really find anywhere else. So yeah, that's a heavy question. And I'm curious to know what you think about that, because like, you have a different perspective on that, and you've kind of come from a background where you haven't really explored the Afro side of it as fully as other people have.
Yes, for me, I think part of it, and I would like to also ask the audience that we have here, is if you're of Latin descent, if you're Afro descent, if you're both, do you consider yourself as Afro-Latino? Is that a label that you would willingly apply? Do you think there's something better? So while I'm talking, you guys can think about that. But for me, it really, I think it's a good initiative for people to start accepting their full selves. And I think it's something that is anchored in a North American context, because Latinidad it exists in Latin America, but not to the extent that we use it here in Canada. Because, if I were to go back to Nicaragua, then I'm seen as a Nicaraguense, and Nicaraguenses, they will see, when they move to Costa Rica or they go to Guatemala, they're seen as immigrants or as refugees. And so there's always this I guess, stratification or different levels of Latinidad within, and like the different Latin identities within Latin America. When you come to the US or you come to Canada or even Europe, we're looking for community. And oftentimes sticking to our national identities isn't enough. And the cultures within Latin America share enough similarities that we can say, oh, we're Latino. You know, you meet somebody in the street and you start talking, oh, you speak Spanish, oh, cool. You know, where you from? Ecuador. Ah, perfecto. Yo también conozco una persona de Ecuador. And it's that way to create connection. And so I think Latinidad has served its purpose in the sense of bringing people together who are in the diaspora, who have left those countries. And I think the role now of Afro-Latinidad is to bring to the forefront and to challenge people about the histories of their individual countries, because the Afro-Latin experience, for example, in Cuba, is completely different than the Afro-Latin experience in Brazil. And you know, and even you take Brazil, for example, you know, you have samba and you have Brazilian funk and all that music and the rhythms, the movements, and those are African, those are Black rhythms and movements. But when you think of you know, a dancer, a samba dancer, you don't immediately think of a Black person dancing, because where the seats of power, the seats of influence is in the South, in Rio de Janeiro, I'm forgetting the other big city, in Lily, help me out here. Sao Paulo. Obrigado. And that's where you had a lot of the European immigrants, you had Lebanese immigrants, and then in the north is where the poorer populations are, and those are generally darker skinned populations. And so what you have is this perpetuation of the structures that were put in place by colonialism, perhaps more starkly in certain countries than others, but still to the extent that even people who are born outside of those contexts will still internalize that through their parents, through their cousins, and etc. And I think I think one of the ideals of Afro-Latinidad is to put to the forefront that, yeah, sure, we can be Latino, but we also have to recognize the other composing parts of that, of the African side, and not to have this idea that, you know, being Black or becoming too tanned is something bad, because we see that in the telenovelas, we see that in the political structures, the people in power. And what really helped me was starting to just accept, you know, for example, my hair type. You know, if I let my hair, I mean, it's in braids right now, but I let it grow and it's a full-on Afro. And for a long time, even though I didn't know that was the reason I was doing it, I didn't want to let my hair grow out, because I knew that it would be seen as messy, or it would be seen as unprofessional, or that it was just too different from what I saw on TV, from what I saw in media. And so for a long time, I kept it short, kept it buzzed. And then you have, I think for me, what really helped was different artists. You have Don Omar, Tego Calderon, Osuna, and you have these people who are owning their Blackness, and they're running with it. You have Celia Cruz, and all those people for me were like incredible role models, even though at the time when I first started hearing about them, I didn't really click, because I wasn't to that level to understand that, you know, this is also part of me. Yeah, so I mean, for me, I think what I would like to see from your end is, with, I guess now, would you like, do you find that because you touched on this before, do you find that the language piece of Afro-Latin, because you're always kind of pushed to choose a side, you know? But do you think, like, for you personally, like, do you feel that now at a point where you can say, I'm Latina, and, you know, it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks, or you still feel that there's this need to hablar español and be able to express yourself in Spanish and kind of have that side of Latin culture?
Yeah, there definitely is. I definitely feel that need and that pressure, definitely. I will still express myself as Latina, no matter what. I've met a lot of just Latin, not Afro-Latin, but Latin people who don't speak Spanish, or who don't speak a dialect of any type. And so, and even in themselves, where it's like, I am Latino, but like I don't speak Spanish. Like you can hear like the slight, like, I know. I know I don't. And so I think that although language in our cultures does play a massive part of it, like it shouldn't be the only defining factor of who we are as Latin peoples. I am learning, to say the least. Like I am learning, and like my little brother, he just graduated high school and he graduated with his IB diploma in Spanish. And he was super proud about that because he was like, I can speak Spanish at least to like a certain degree, and like I'll continue it in university so that I can fully be Spanish, like speak Spanish, and that way I don't have to like deal with that pressure and don't have to feel as though I'm not as worthy to be Latino as everyone else. And I know like that's played a big pressure on what languages he's chosen within his high school career and within his university career as well, because he wants to be part of a community, and he doesn't feel like he is part of a community currently, within his mixedness and within the Afro-Latinidad. And my brother is lighter than I am, has like curlier hair than I do, super, super tall. So like he really straddles onto that border really, really tightly, in the sense that he looks like he could be from anywhere. And he has been mistaken for being literally across the globe. And so although language is a big part of it, and it does affect me to this day, and it is something that I still struggle with, I don't think that it should be something that defines us and defines the way that we are able to express our Latinidad, and how that also interplays with Afro-Latinidad, because realistically, you don't necessarily hear a lot of people speaking certain African languages or patois, for example, from the Caribbean all the time. And so even within that, like our Afro-Latinidadness doesn't take on an exemplifying factor of language from the Afro side of it.
Mm. And I think you touched on something important, because I think even now, even the fact that we're using Latinidad and Afro-Latinidad, we make the differentiation between the Caribbean and Latin America. I mean, that differentiation is really, it's just the different colonizers. Like it's concretely, there's, you know, there's, okay, oh, who are you colonized by? Okay, England, the UK, great. So then you're Caribbean. Oh, who are you colonized? Portugal, Spain. Okay, you're Latin America. You know, and and I think we still, I think collectively we're slowly gaining this appreciation for this history, that we still fully haven't unpacked, because we're still defining ourselves from that. And I think I guess the next step in the evolution of this collective identity of Afro-Latinidad, Latinos, is really to come up with a new way of defining ourselves that isn't based upon colonialization, right? I think the day where we can move past that and kind of define ourselves by a different marker, whether, I don't even know what that could be. I'm still in that box, right? But I think we're taking important first steps to start talking about what these identities are, where they come from, why we think the way that we do. And yeah, I think the movement forward is really going that extra step and seeing, okay, you know, the Latinos that are here watching, you know, we're immigrants, we're sons, daughters of immigrants, children of immigrants, and we want to have that belonging. And again, I come back to this because I think it's I think the human experience, we're always looking to connect with people and have that closeness. And I think right now what people are discovering is that, you know, there's a price that we pay to have that closeness and to ignore the things that make us different. And there's always that difficulty, I think, because people they always want to put you in a box, right? And, you know, I look at you, and if I didn't know you, that, okay, that girl is Black. And for me, when I'm considering, okay, Latino, Latina, I'm gonna look for Spanish, right? Like that's your go-to. It's the easily identifiable thing, because you can have Latinos and Latinas that are every color of the spectrum. And the thing is, Latinidad is not necessarily a racial identity. It's a cultural, it's a made-up identity. Anyone who's born in Latin America, who's raised there, can be Latino. You know, you can have Asian, East Asian looking Latinos, South Asian looking Latino. I know people who are Latino like that. And I remember I was shocked when I went to Nicaragua and I met Japanese Latinos. And these people, they spoke Espanol with an accent that was Nicaraguan, and a Nicaraguan accent that I don't even have. But I would be considered Latino like this, whereas they would always be considered an outsider. Yeah. And so I think that's the difficulty for me, is that it's that grouping. You know, we want, and it's good to be in a group, but I think it's always important to ask ourselves, okay, we're creating this group, and how or who are we excluding by doing so?
Yeah, and you touched on it a bit earlier as well, in the sense that, like, when we are outside of certain areas in the country, we're just grouped together as Latinos. And as soon as we get into certain areas in certain countries, it's like, oh no, you're Cubano, you're Nicaraguan, or you're Brazilian. Like, there's so many different areas of Latinidad, and that boxiness of placing us in them, of like, well, I'm Latino outside of the country, but here, like, I'm not necessarily that, or I'm not enough of that. I think it's really interesting. On top of that, I had a very interesting conversation with one of my professors about this, of the way that we consider the people who colonized us, whether that be Portugal or Italy or Spain, how, although they are considered Hispanic or Latino, they're not at the same time. And it took me a while to actually consider this, because I had never actually looked at it that way. I was like, well, no, they're kind of like just Europeans. And it's like, okay, yeah, but like, where did, you know, a lot of the things that most Latin cultures do today come from? They come from the colonized peoples, and like the mixture of colonized and indigenous peoples from those times. And I was like, oh, okay. And actually understanding that, like, people from Portugal and Italy and Spain are Latin and Hispanic peoples. It was like, I don't know why, but it kind of like took me back, and having conversations with people who were from Latin America specifically, who were like, no, like they don't know. It was just like a hard, like that was not happening at all. And so I think it's really interesting how you brought up like the colonizer perspective, because when you go to those countries, like it's a completely different perspective of what Latinness is. In the sense that, like, I know for Italy, for example, like Latinness takes on a very complex meaning, and there's a very, very clear divide between like the South and the North, for example. And like, because the South, like, which is where my family's from, the South look Black, to put it simply. I have like family members over there who look darker than I am, who have kinkier hair than I do, and who speak Italian, have been speaking Italian for a long time, who don't consider themselves Black, who don't consider themselves Latinos. They consider themselves Italian, and they don't ever interplay the fact that these three things can conjoin and are actually just one thing at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And so like,
because I think there's a differentiation between Latinidad as a cultural identity, as a geographical identity, and as a result of colonialism. So I think that's where the difficulty in defining comes from, because everyone will come at it from a different perspective, and have different cultural baggage and experience that will inform that mentality, basically. And I don't want to cut ourselves short, but I think, Lily, I don't know how much more time we have, but I think we're coming up on the hour.
Yes, we actually we had like a confusing schedule on this, and so on our website is actually set for an hour 30. So I'm free to get into questions right now, and we can just come to a close whenever this conversation ends. But I think it could be a good moment for opening for questions for sure. It's fascinating to hear about all this, because I am white Latin American from Brazil who doesn't speak Spanish, and so to encounter my Latin Americanidad, not Afro, from Portuguese and Italian descent, even that was a little harder. Brazil is just so big and and feels separated by the Amazon, the Andes, the language, that I needed to immigrate to Canada to find this community and get into this so interesting conversations. In preparation for this, I was reading a little bit about Afro-Latinidad, and it's really interesting how you find all sorts of conversations, because there's over 200 million Afro descendants in Latin America, and that we are counting just like around 20 countries, which is more Central America and South America, not necessarily the Caribbean, which is a whole other story. How Latin American those groups are. Here, Black, like it's pretty much, if you feel Latin America, if you identify with that, because then you are, because in many cases here in Canada, we are talking about second, third generation, but people who are still connected to those roots. And the other thing is, I grew up with colorism. So in Brazil, it's less, because I think racism in North America is more related to the place you came from than color necessarily. And in Brazil, these variations are very if you look white, but you are, because in Brazil we had immigration from so many groups. You're talking about the Lebanese, and so if you look white, you're going to be accepted as white. While there are groups of people who talk about the experience of Afro-Latinidad as being something that's more related to color, like you would have to be Black to talk about, like if you don't have the Black experience and you are brown, you shouldn't label yourself as Afro-Latinx. And so it's fascinating to me, because we just went through the series of talks in this partnership with the VPL. And we have, when you have like a Japanese Peruvian who talks about how she gets the kind of the wrong races, like she's identified as Asian and she gets Asian hate, while her own identification is very much with Peru and the Peruvian experience, although she doesn't look the part. And so I think that these connections of belonging and identity are very important, and as what Patrick was saying, that we want to feel connected to a group, but there is the good side and the evil side of labels. You still need the labels. And one of our conversations was with the High Commissioner of Human Rights here in BC, and she was talking about how she actually wants to know, how many Latin Americans or people who identify as Latin Americans are here, because that's the way that we, with census, that's how you are going to allocate money for those communities. And so the label in that case can potentially be helpful, but there is also the potential of being harmful in these other circumstances. So it's really fascinating to me. I wanted to acknowledge that Patrick's actually in Berlin, and we were hearing all those
birds.
German birds, which is just so cool. And I love your guys' stops, and I really encourage people to look up La Connexional and buying from this business, because they are on Instagram. They are wonderful on Instagram. So Angela, maybe you can put the handle of La Connexional on the chat, because then people can follow them there and buy those beautiful hoodies. But so we are totally open for questions now, or just it doesn't have to be a question. If you guys want to jump in on this conversation, we would love to hear from you.
And I think if no one's going to talk, I think I just want to point out this quote that Velia sent, and I think Latinidad, Afro-Latinidad, they're concepts that were created really when immigrants came to North America, because again it comes back to survival. And so this quote, it says, in the US, a drop of black blood makes you black, but in Argentina, a drop of white blood makes you white, said Gomez. In a society where Afro-descendants were marginalized, many Afro-descendant families emphasized their whiteness to save themselves. They ripped up old photos and denied the existence of a black relative. And so she posts the link to the story, and I think 100%, I think people were, and I think we have the privilege of being able to discuss these things, and be able to think of a better way of doing things, because we've been able to come to a country or countries where there wasn't the threat of war or abject poverty. And when you don't have enough food to eat, you're looking for the way to get yourself enough resources to survive. And so you don't have time to think about, was that racist? Was this or that? It's really about, okay, can I feed my family today? Can I feed myself today? Do I have enough water to drink? And if that meant erasing a part of your identity to survive, then I think more than a handful of people decided to do so. And so I think within that context now in Canada, it's that it comes back to that Latinidad, and we can say, oh, I'm Latino, I'm Latino coming up, but the Latino part is, it gives me a community, it gives me a source of resilience, so that even if I face hardship, I can say, I can turn to this community and be like, I have the support here. I have these people who speak the same language with similar cultures, and we can help each other survive whatever it is we're trying to face.
True, and good point. Roseanne saying, thank you both for such a fascinating discussion. Can you say a little more about the role of arts and culture in your own experience of Afro-Latinidad in Canada? I love this question, because we are all about that.
Yeah. Celine, do you want to?
No, I know your connection, Patrick, with culture and, dance and music. So I would love to hear from you.
Sure. Yeah, so for me, I'm an avid dancer. I was on multiple dance teams for salsa, bachata, kizomba, and it was often within those dances that I took the time to really understand the culture behind it and the roots of those dances. So for example, Kizomba, while now it's seen as a Latin dance, it actually comes from Angola. And then it was popularized in Europe, and then it came over here. And so salsa as well, cumbia, many of the steps come from Afro descendant peoples, slaves, that have these steps and had these rhythms to essentially maintain hope and maintain their resilience. And so a lot of these songs come from that place of pain and of the necessity of creating community. Exactly, champeta in Colombia, así es. And so for me, it was really through dance that I started exploring Afro-Latinidad more, because what I saw in Edmonton and in Calgary, where I was teaching and learning, was that there was again this erasure of dance, and the idea was to kind of put it as a standalone concept, when in reality, you know, it's important to understand the roots of the arts that you're practicing, or the arts and the dance that you're doing, because without that, then you really strip away everything that makes that dance special. And so I found that extremely important for me, and also helped me to kind of reflect on my own identity and my own relationship to Afro-Latinidad and those cultures there.
I will add to that, because VLAC exists with this mission of sharing a deeper understanding of Latin American arts and cultures. And we kind of use arts and cultures as the bait, you know, because like we never do arts programs that don't have you are always going to leave one of our programs knowing a little bit better. So there is always an aspect of education through what we do. And so like we did a concert on mariachi 2 years ago at the end of the year. And so, but then it's not just mariachi, it's women mariachi, and the role of you know, feminism in this macho world of mariachi. So we are still seeing the mariachi playing and singing, and it's beautiful, but you know, it's an opportunity for us to discuss the context in which that art exists. We are getting some thank yous. I think we can move on to wrap up. Let me see. Olivia is saying, would you recommend any resources or approaches for learning more about how colonial legacies shape our identities? So we are talking about resources here.
Yeah, so I can drop some, I don't know if people are on Instagram or Facebook, but I can drop some accounts that are really good for understanding kind of the interplay between Latinidad, Afro-Latinidad, colonialism, present day, and the politics also surrounding that. So I'll drop those in the comments. Celine, I'm sure you have some resources that you want to share.
Yeah, for sure. There are a couple that I'll send over to Patrick afterwards, and he can also drop those. But something that I found that's really, if you're just trying to figure out where to go from, or you want to understand a bit more, is actually just looking at people who are from those spaces and not taking the colonizer route of like, this was written by a white person 100 years ago, whatever, or even white people today, like actually looking at the way that people from certain areas who are Latin, who are African, who are Afro-Latinx, are writing these stories and writing these cultures now. And oftentimes you'll find them in like community and culture areas within like bookstores. But I find that just going through them and actually like picking some books and just like looking at interesting titles has opened up a broad spectrum of books and resources that you could find through there.
And from our point, VLAC will keep on bringing these conversations forward and giving the space for these conversations. Thank you all. And thanks Patrick and Celine for sharing so much and for this exciting conversation. We learn quite a bit here, and I think that this is just the beginning of a conversation that we can keep on exploring. Thank you all for taking the time to be here with us during your lunch break, probably, and despite the gorgeous weather out there. The video recording of this event will be available on Vlach's YouTube channels in a few days. And this event was also live streamed to Vlach's page on Facebook. So we are going to add a lot of links to the chat right now. We also would like to invite you guys to follow us on Instagram besides La Connexional, and to follow us on Facebook. I want to remind you that Vlach has one more event coming up this month that might interest you. Actually, Manuel Pina is with us here today, and he will be in conversation with our Vice President, Miret Rodriguez, who is an art historian, and Manuel Pina is a local artist from Cuba. And Angela is putting the link to register for that. Is another free event. But it's free, but the seats are limited, so please register soon just to guarantee that you'll be able to join us. And speaking about free events, Vlach is currently running a donation campaign. If you would like to keep events like this available to all, please consider donating any amount, even if small. And that is another link in the chat. So that's it for today. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to turn off my camera, but we are going to keep the event open for another few minutes in case you want to click or copy some of the links we shared. Patrick and Celine, any last words before we wrap it up?
No, I just wanted to say muchísimas gracias, obrigado. And thank you to everyone that took time out of their day, that watching on Facebook, coming to the Zoom. I hope that this was informative. I hope that you learned some new things about yourselves, about your children, who knows. You know, maybe next time we can do a talk in Espanol, Portuguese, I don't know, we'll see. But I think it could be valuable also for people who might not speak English well enough to also explore this topic and be able to interact in a language that they're comfortable in.
Sure, point taken. Celine?
Yeah, no, just a big thank you to everyone. I hope you enjoyed, and I really enjoyed this conversation and seeing so many people and faces that look like mine and understand what I go through. So I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I hope you go through the resources and find something that you like, and that if you find some new items that, you know, hopefully share them with us as well.
Okay, thank you all. Thank you so very much.